Commitment is to the work of the next generation of professors. I really believe that we need to prepare academic leaders in addition to all the other kinds of leaders that we have.
I see those new religious leaders as catalysts, and I feel that they have to be invested in.
To be a catalyst, either as facilitator and as a student too, is to actually curate a space in which we can develop honest and genuine conversation that pushes
My commitment is to the work of the next generation of professors. I really believe that we need to prepare academic leaders in addition to all the other kinds of leaders that we have.
I see those new religious leaders as catalysts, and I feel that they have to be invested in.
to be a catalyst, either as facilitator and as a student too, is to actually curate.
My commitment is to the work of the next generation of professors. I really believe that we need to prepare academic leaders, in addition to all the other kinds of leaders that we have.
I see those new religious leaders as catalysts, and I feel that they have to be invested in.
To be a catalyst, either as facilitator and as a student too, is to actually curate a space in which we can develop honest and genuine conversation that pushes us to go beyond the superficial.
The new crop of scholars that we have come built in with interests that crisscross disciplinary boundaries. This is going to create a sea change in the way we understand knowledge.
Well, good morning again. Thank you for coming back. It'll be good to start with a little bit of a video so you hear the voices of some of our colleagues at PSR that have helped to shape your clergy here, as well as many others, pretty much the entire staff of our annual conference, our conference here in Northern California, Nevada. Conference Minister Nina, of course, and also Lauren and other ACMs. Well, PSR alums, so we're really excited. We're just back on campus a couple of weeks ago to help. Is that not quite picking up? Might have died. All right, there we go. It's saying, okay, enough talking, yo. Ooh, all right, a little hot. Now it's working. Sorry. There we go. Now we're good. All right, thank you, thank you. Thank you for making it possible. All right, so very, very quickly, what brought you into this conversation? All right, you like the sermon, good. Then you want another sermon, we'll do it, right. Oh, all right, great. So their parents, a lot, generational commitments to the school, yeah. Others? Students. Yeah, students, how are they doing? Great. Other things that my brother. All right, we're in your trust. Well, thank you for your commitment to PSR and a further legacy of that. Well, the title for this second hour conversation is around the idea of leadership in apocalyptic times. And what I want to invite us to think about a little bit is leadership and how we develop leadership, particularly within religious communities, and the role that these type of leadership, of spiritually rooted leadership, not just clergy, certainly through that, but through our own leadership in our community. The sermon this morning was inviting us to think about the role of the church as covenantal communities to lead a movement of transformative change in our society. And so I want to start out with a little bit of a quote. If we go to the next slide. This is from one of my predecessors at PSR in 1894. So you can go to the next slide there. So this is from John McLean, who was a president at PSR all the way across the century transition from the 1800s into the 1900s. And he spoke this to the faculty and staff, or the board and the faculty meeting and talking about the moment that they were living in 1894. If you think about what was happening at that time, any memory or like from your history books, like what was going on in 1890s in the United States? Yeah, Andover in California. So California, lots of movement of people here following the discovery of gold. So this place had just boomed. What other things were going on? The Gilded Age. In many ways, the Industrial Revolution brought a technology transformation that disrupted pretty much everything we do, displacing lots of people. Jobs disappeared overnight based on that, and other jobs appeared. And so there was both a major shift from rural to urban, the development of systems that really began to accumulate great wealth to a handful of people in that time. And one of the things that was introduced significantly at the time was tariffs as one of the significant ways to try to control the movement of resources across the world, and to be able to there was a very nativist sense in the Chinese Exclusionary Act. It was started in 1892 as a way to stop the movement of Chinese people, and very anti-immigrant sentiment that shaped that period of time. And there was there was also the Industrial Revolution, and its dehumanization created this sense of anxiety in the society about immigrants, about the changes that were taking place. And this is what he says as he looks ahead as president of a very small institution at the time. PSR was the first seminary west of the Mississippi. If you don't know much about that, if you want to go back, I'll read through this. So the new century promises to disclose events and conditions in society of a wildly revolutionary character. So if you're feeling a little bit like today, we are just in this crazy moment and it's so different, the reality is humans have been in periods of transition for a long time. What ought to be the attitude and function of a theological seminary at such a time? So this is a question that he has asked then, it's a question we ask now. As a church, as a product of the church, seminaries that prepare leaders for the church and for our communities, what ought to be the attitude and function? And what he says is it ought to crave for itself due share in shaping the new order of things. This is quite a bold statement for a tiny institution in the Western United States, trying to prepare many of the leaders that shaped a lot of the congregations that are now part of Northern California Nevada Conference at the United Church of Christ and many other traditions. PSR from its beginning was an independent institution because no one tradition could really afford to build a seminary. So they all came together to shape this seminary that would educate students and clergy and leaders for many other traditions. The school changed its name from Pacific Theological Seminary to Pacific School of Religion about 50 years in. The reason for that change in the early 1900s was twofold. One was to move from seminary to school because the school had been educating women almost since its beginning, since 1872. And seminary was still only associated with males and with pastoral leadership. And while that was very core to the mission of the school, it also prepared a lot of women whose ministries went beyond that, and others as well whose work went beyond congregational ministry to other forms of transformative, spiritually rooted leadership. The second change was from theological to religion. And that shift was the understanding that Christian leaders had to be prepared with a broader understanding of non-Christian traditions, of the world's religious traditions. I mentioned earlier today that this coming year, will mark 100 years of one of our buildings on campus, Holbrook Hall. If you come to campus, when you come to campus to visit, around the library, what was originally the library in 1926, they built this building and put stones of carved symbols of all the world's religious traditions in a Christian seminary 100 years ago. This was very much of a revolutionary activity on the part of the school to imagine a different way of thinking about how leaders are to be prepared. So as we at PSR tried to answer that question today, if we go to the next slide, we begin with clarity of our identity. Who are we? And what is our dream? And our dream is simply to create a world where all can thrive. So we're still this rather small institution with great ambition. We want to create a world where all can thrive. And so if we go to the next thing, but what we wrestle with, if you go to the next slide, is a question about what stands in the way of that dream to create a world where all can thrive, at least through our own perspective as a seminary. So we argue that the world, faith communities, and education are facing multiple crises. And that's what we'll get to think about today. How do we respond in a time when there are multiple crises? And then we also recognize that the current model of theological education, it's not fulfilling its potential. While we have a legacy as an institution, as a graduate program, we recognize that we've had to really rethink what we do in the preparation of leaders for the church and to expand our work beyond our boundaries. So we have been transformed completely. All educational institutions have to rethink affordability, to rethink access. The model, we say, is limited by its ability to identify who shall go, whom shall I call, who shall I send, right? How do we think about how people see themselves as leaders, spiritually rooted leaders that may help support their congregations, their communities, and the institutions around it, to prepare them? What shall we teach people who are interested in preparing for leadership, whether they are congregational leaders with lay congregational leaders or clergy? And then also to network with one another. We recognize that the challenge we are facing to create a world where all can thrive needs to be addressed by the preparation of leaders, but we need to reimagine those systems so people can be identified, prepared, and network so that they can contribute to the solution. If we go to the next slide. And so that's what informs our mission, right? Which is that our mission is to prepare a diverse cadre of spiritually rooted leaders with a vision, resilience, and skill to create a world where all can thrive. If you skipped 2 slides, we're going to move through a few of them a little quicker. So we'll go to slide 7. If you think about this moment, I described the world that in my predecessor in a seminary had, thought about his work and what he was facing. Our world today, our work today has been shaped by, protests, by depolarization, and by a pandemic. And then to that, we can add many other things, right? So we're finding ourselves in this moment of deep disorientation. If you go to the next slide. Earlier today, I identified this, the reality of an environmental crisis, not just a political reality, but an environmental crisis. And so it does feel, and I provocatively titled this conversation, leading in apocalyptic times. Do you remember this picture just from a couple of years ago in the middle of the pandemic, and our skies were going red because of all the fires around us? And it really felt that way. The sheer number of movies and conversations that were going on put us in mind of that old movie of Apocalypse Now. And it really felt as if we were living in the middle of that. So what does the word apocalypse mean? Anyway, any idea? We think of it as chaos, right? Like as the sense of the end of the world, right? Mm-hmm. The end, yeah. Now, the reality is, if we go to the next slide, is that that's not on here. It's later on in the slides. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you without a slide. The word apocalyptic actually comes from the Greek word for revelation. So the last book in the Bible is often referred to as the Apocalypse or Revelations, right? It's the book of Revelation. And so what it means, it does mean ending of an epoch. It does mean the end of things. And we think of the book of Revelation as this kind of chaotic drama of the world coming to an end. A lot of traditions have really, kind of grabbed onto that idea and talked about who's going to be left behind and all that. But the reality is that the text, and as people of faith, invites us not only to think about endings, but about what's being revealed when an epoch is shifting, when there is a new moment coming up. What is God up to? It basically is about pulling the curtain on the realities we may think of ourselves in order to move us into a new reality with attention to what God is up to in the world. So as we engage a little bit of a conversation together, I want us to think both about the moment we are living that feels disorienting and blowing up everywhere, but also about how we as people of faith stand into this. That question from the president of PSR in the late 1800s, what ought to be our attitude and function as a church, as a seminary in this time? And part of it is, as people of faith, we come to this with groundedness, with hope, with awareness that whatever else is happening, that feels fully overwhelming and must be named as a reality that is devastating the lives of many, that we believe that God is the one ultimately in control of the world. That we are invited to think about this tiny little pebble we call Earth, zooming around the universe as part of a much larger vision of what God is up to in the world. There's lots of ways in which this current moment we are living with has been described. Many of you are familiar with the term VUCA. It's a pretty common term, or it became very common. So where did you hear of it? At work. In what way? Yeah. So that would be a very interesting conversation to have. So in market research, right, how do we think about what's happening around us for companies to consider, right? So VUCA was actually a term that came out of the military in terms of describing in the 1980s what felt like an acceleration of change around us, right? And so it stands for volatility. Now, this is already 30, 40-year-old term, right? So think about how much we've accelerated all this. Volatility, so rapid and unexpected change. Then uncertainty, pending change, unknowns, right? Like what happens next? Which way are we going? There's a lot of confusion. Complexity, multiple key decision factors all at once. And ambiguity. There are just too many known unknowns and too many unknown knowns. There's a whole thing that goes on that around the understanding for the military about how do we live in a world that is being shaped by this level of disruption. So hopefully you're making the connection to what you feel in your gut, right? That it just, maybe it should be called something that's happening. You know, VUCA is something that happens when you eat a bad meal, right? Like it's just like, ugh, just feels like things are just churning inside us in ways that we don't fully understand. Let's go to the next slide. And, you know, what seminary presidents do oftentimes is that we'll quote from the, from the global risk report. Not really. Anyway, this is the global risk report is from the World Economic Forum. Earlier today, I gave you homework to read the book of Ruth. This is the homework for Davos. So every year when the wealthiest nations come together and the leaders of the largest economies come together, the World Economic Forum prepares their homework to read. And this report is made available publicly every year. I'd really encourage you to take a look at it when it comes out. I'll quote just a couple of things from it. This is from 2023, if we go to the next slide. And the report is often, it's titled the Global Risks Report. Just the next slide. Let's see, whoop. All right, there we go. So this is what it says. Again, this is already 2 years back. So we're getting closer from VUCA in the 80s to 2023, right after the pandemic. And then it starts out by saying that as 2023 begins, the world is facing a set of risks that feels both wholly new and eerily familiar. So if you think about the reality of taking the book of Ruth in context of conversation and looking at a book that is set way, way back. So there's a familiarity to some of the things that we are living with, an eerie familiarity, but also things that are wholly new. A lot of comparisons have been made between our moment and the 1960s or other periods of time in human history or US history. I just went to watch Suffs, the musical about the suffrage movement. It's unfortunately done now. Otherwise, I really would encourage you to go see it. It's phenomenal. But it traces the work of the suffrage movement. And again, you get these resonances of how familiar certain things are. Certainly, we are finding ourselves in this contrast of Musk getting a $1 trillion contract when we're fighting over food stamps to the Gilded Age, right? So we are definitely feeling this sense of an eerie familiarity. Let's go to the next slide, which I think is the one we want to pay attention to as religious communities and congregations. This is what they are, it continues on to say. The persistence of these crises is already reshaping the world that we live in, ushering in economic and technological fragmentation. And this is what I want us to think about. There's a fragmentation that happens, right? Things just sort of begin to not feel connected. The goal of this congregation often is creating a place of belonging. We heard such beautiful articulation of the importance of belonging as the antidote because we are feeling fragmented. A continued push for national resilience in strategic sectors would come at a cost, one that only a few economies can bear. Geopolitical dynamics are also creating significant headwinds for global cooperation, which often acts as a guardrail to these global risks. I don't know if you're tracking this. This is 2 years ago. We never could have imagined Trump would get elected, except that this would have told us that people are feeling fragmented. And as that happens, nations are beginning to think, sorry, y'all, we're going to take care of ourselves. And we're going to make America great again. And nothing else will matter, right? In a moment of this much crisis, not everybody's going to be able to respond. So we're just going to make our own little floaties so we stay okay and hoard everything into ourselves. Now, is that the right direction? The risk is that without global collaboration that has been a guardrail to excesses, we begin to see this challenge taking place. Earlier this week, I want to get to the solutions in a minute here and then open it up for questions, or at least what we're trying to do about it. But one last thing about what is it that we are facing today. If we go to the next slide, in the New York Times, Thomas Friedman wrote a piece in an op-ed this last week that, again, giving you lots of homework, but encourage you to read that piece. You can forget everything else except the book of Ruth, but read this piece. Thomas Friedman says, welcome to our new era. What do we call it? And what he describes in there is that there's all these polycrises, which is the title used in that 2023 economic report, that there is polycrisis happening all at the same time. We are moving beyond a world of binaries. The US versus Russia, that's the Cold War. Then we went into a post-Cold War of the sense that the world had two binary powers, and then it became unipolar, right? We beat Russia, so it's only the United States. And now we're in this place in which we have a very poly, meaning many, polar system. China is ascending in ways we would never have expected. India is becoming very strong. Brazil has its own strength, and regional efforts are being made to figure out who's going to maintain a level of control. So this is what's happening globally, right? So there's this constant poly movement that is happening. If you can skip 2 slides to the one that has the video on number 16. And so what he says, what Friedman calls this, after playing around with different names, he calls it the Polyscene, right? A season or a time or a moment in our history in which there is a plurality of ideas of things. Now that can feel alarming and fragmented, or it can also feel integrated. Oh, yeah, that's fine. You can go back to the beginning a little bit. How many of you saw this movie, Everything All at Once Everywhere?
Link your consciousness to another version of yourself. Accessing all the memories and skills. It's called verse jumping. There's a great evil spreading throughout the many verses. And you may be your only chance of stopping it.
So if you have watched this movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is one of the many multiverse movies. Maybe you heard from your grandkids or from others around you, or you like Spider-Man and the multiverse. There's been a lot of multiverse movies that have come out. The idea that reality is all happening at the same time and it feels fragmented. In this movie, the character is all of a sudden becoming aware of different lives she's lived in different different universes at the same time, and initially feels really disoriented by all these realities happening at once. Eventually, she begins to be able to kind of get a sense that there is a continuity or a sense of wholeness that can be arrived at in this fragmented world. So from VUCA world to a polycrisis and a polyscene to the idea of how do we prepare leaders? How do we prepare ourselves to lead in a time that feels so fragmented? How do we begin to reconcile the sense that as I was driving here this morning and thinking about our conversation, I thought, it's so disorienting to drive through a beautiful morning, misty, gorgeous mountains and lots of green, very orderly streets and roads, and hardly feeling as if there's a crisis going on, right? So at times, I think we feel that disconnect between how many of our lives may not be radically affected yet. We feel it. We feel the anxiety of what's at our doors or what's happening to our communities, to our congregations, but there are moments in which we don't feel it or notice it ourselves. We recognize other people may be much more significantly affected by what is happening. So the thing is, how do we lead in a moment like this? That we are able to find a connection that or something that helps us avoid that fragmentation. This community is making efforts in that direction. One example is the partnering relationship with a sister parish, both in Nicaragua and Guatemala. Right? It allows you to have a view of two different worlds that are in conversation with one another. And if we listen to one another, we recognize the way that our actions here might be affecting another part of the world, or how the changes happening in that community might be reflected in our lives and in our neighborhoods. So part of it is being willing to recognize that. As a people who are leading in an apocalyptic time, then part of what we need to do is to also think about how do we stand into this moment. So I'll share two slides and then close for now. The next one is, if you go to the next slide, this is another book by Thomas Friedman. If you go to the next slide there. So this, what he talks about in his book, Thank You for Being Late, is that he says there is a level of change that is happening, an acceleration of change in everything that we do. And we begin to feel that pressure, right? And so as things accelerate, he looks at environmental degradation, technology, and globalization. All these things are accelerating as they change. But human capacity to adapt is more linear, right? There's only so many apps and so many things we can learn, right? There's so many ways we can prove our identity to our next app to figure out double check or ID or your finger or your face. So we begin to feel a gap between the acceleration of change and our ability to adapt. Usually leadership has helped to make that adaptation. When the world moves slowly in change, you think about an agrarian society that for a long time, change was not that radical, then the kind of leaders you need can be just a handful of leaders that figure out the adaptation and get everybody else on board. As churches, we rely primarily on clergy we would do the studying on the preparation, and the clergy would help the communities adapt to whatever was coming next and move together in that way. But as change accelerates and human capacity to adapt is less, then we create this gap. That's what we feel in our gut, is that gap, right? That we just cannot keep up, and we feel that disorientation. So our work of leadership, which can no longer simply be done by a small group of educated people, whether it's Harvard graduates, Stanford graduates, whatever you want to call it, we can no longer rely simply on educating a small group of people who are then going to do the work for us and interpret for us how to be church anew, how to do our work anew. We need actually a lot more people to participate in that process of interpreting and reimagining how we do work together. And the last slide. In our work at PSR, the emphasis we make is that there are different ways in which that change takes place. And we call these kind of levels of impact. And this will be a simple explanation of it. The first way we make change is by direct impact. We bring the barrel of food and we bring it to people. This is direct service and direct impact, and it's critically important. At some point, we step back and we say, why do we need to do this? Why are people hungry? Or can we do better together? Actually, that's the first question, right? Yes, we'll send it to the food pantry. So we scale direct service. Some of us prepare for leadership in that scale direct service, right? The next one is, why are people hungry? What kind of systems are creating inequalities? And we begin to challenge those in our study, in our preparation, in our advocacy. And some of us engage leadership around policy change. But there are moments like what we are living with in this change of seasons, or as Pope Francis said, it's not a change of seasons, it's a season of changes. As we're in this moment, we're actually looking at frameworks being redone, narrative change. We're at a moment in which the way the narratives, the stories, the understandings that shape our policies are being challenged. How is it possible that a new administration in 10 months can unravel so much? In part because it has ushered in a radically different narrative about migration, about economy, about our role in the world, and it has a very rehearsed, very different narrative that informs lots of policies and is having impact on the scale direct service and on the direct service. So how are we as religious communities going to spend our time rethinking our narratives? We are a people of story. Theological education in the church and at the seminary are primarily about those frameworks. So as a community, we are developing resources at PSR for clergy, but for lay leaders as well. We have developed an online platform that creates more access to the education that we do. We are doing events that help people think about migration. We have one this coming Tuesday on racism and a book called Beyond the White Church. We're trying to find ways in which we provide more direct resourcing to congregations in the work that they do. And we invite both your partnership as we do this, your support as we try together to figure out how do we prepare leaders with the capacity to think in those big picture terms so that they and us can address and try to find some of the solutions to the issues that we're facing. I'll stop there and maybe take about 10 minutes for some Q&A if we have that time. Sound good? Oh, thank you.
I hate to get to the institutional thing, but I'm still interested because this congregation for a long time had a member who was very engaged in the GTU and the Graduate Theologic Union. And I know that a lot of people might be confused about the difference between the GTU and PSR.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're a total alphabet soup. You know, we have PSR, GTU, CDSP, PLTS, BST, all kinds of seminaries. So the Graduate Theological Union is a group of 9 seminaries that collaborate together and 11 centers from the world's religious traditions. So it's the largest theological consortium pretty much in the world, and it's in Berkeley, which is kind of random to think about Berkeley as sort of the hotbed of theological education. So PSR is one of the anchor institutions. We were the first one in that community, and over time, out of that commitment, 50 years in to religious education, began to really reach ecumenically. So there's both Protestant and Catholic seminaries that work together to do programs. So the difference, or the GTU is a consortium of all the schools, and it's the way we have a shared library and a shared doctoral program. And so PSR is one of the member schools of that institution. Yeah.
Other questions?
Comments, questions?
Bob?
David, I'm trying to, excuse me. You're at the heart of what Betty was talking about this morning, and what you've been talking about seems to be bringing together. And I'm trying to think of the Latin word for religion. Isn't it religio? And doesn't that have something to do with bringing together?
Mm-hmm.
Help me with that, David.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit of discussion about the etymology, but yes, oftentimes it's understood to be that religio has to do with relationship, right? Like the way we connect to one another, and that our traditions are meant to create. Right now, unfortunately, is the opposite, right? Religion is viewed, and not just right now. I mean, since the 1600s, Reformation, there's been this splitting of Christian traditions into various smaller and smaller, more atomized institutions. So, but the role of religious traditions has been to create connection and relationship one to the other, right? There's similar root source to that. So the thing is, how do we do that? Right now, that's one of the hardest things to do, because again, everyone does what they think is right in their own sight, to use that text from Judges, right? We're in ourselves in many ways. We see it, generational differences, the unwillingness to be part of community. But by contrast, we are beginning to see a growing hunger and desire for relationship that may not necessarily be expressed in the same way previous generations have, but the younger generations are definitely feeling the impacts of isolation. We're seeing high isolation in older adults. Like San Francisco, for example, has the largest number of older adults living alone of any city in the country.
Wow.
And so you have a lot of people at that part of the spectrum, as well as young children that are feeling quite isolated from each other. So our role is to build that. At PSR, what we're trying to do is to figure out how do we our role is to prepare leaders. We're not the direct service institution, right? We're not even scale direct service. We don't organize food drives or organize direct service opportunities. We prepare the leaders like Todd, like Lauren, like Bob, to help communities do that. So what we're doing now is also continuing to do that work of the preparation of those who feel called to ministry in that way. But we're also recognizing that we need to encourage more people in our congregations, in our communities, to consider their spiritually rooted leadership in their own context, within their work environments, within their congregations, and developing the resources that help them to do that. So that I'll give you a couple of examples of the ways that this is getting lived out. And I'll start out, let's say, from the doctoral level. So we do have a doctoral program in ministry. Right now we have 60 students who are mostly clergy in congregations doing a doctoral ministry program. What that is that they take one particular practice or challenge in their church, and they study that in the community as part of their program. And they're trying to find a solution to that which they are doing. It could be projects include how to do hybrid worship well, better outreach into the community, how to lead youth ministry in a new age. So there's a wide range of projects that those individual clergy are doing, but in that community of 60 learners trying to figure this out together. We're also working at the congregational level. We just started this year a congregational renewal cohort. So we're inviting congregations to identify 3 to 5 leaders of their church that want to commit to a 9-month program of learning together, where they go through some coursework together over those 9 months. And so right now we have 20 participants in the program from 6 congregations that are working together. And each church, as they go through that 9-month period of work, of learning together, they're working on a project at each church. So each congregation is coming in with a project that they want to think about. So they start out with some design thinking at the beginning. What is the problem we're trying to solve? What might be the solution to it? And in the second part of the 9 month, they're trying to figure out ways to implement it. And they're rooting that in their theological reflection, in the reading of scripture, in the practices that help them to sustain and help them to think about how to make that change in their community. So what we're inviting is a partnership to say, we got to bridge that gap, right, of the acceleration and the adaptability. That's where we need to be.
All right, Jim, last question.
So in your motto or what you have on the screen, the word unafraid, I asked myself, what were we afraid of before we were unafraid? So you might just elaborate a little on that.
You know, I think it's interesting to think about. So the way we came up with this, actually, Todd was, I think, working with our communications office as we were kind of going through trying to figure out a rebranding for the school. In that process, we looked back at our history and realized that, you know, in 1872, the school started educating women and was part of the early movement of the suffrage movement. We realized that in the 1880s, the school started educating a large number of Asian and Pacific Islander students in response to the Chinese Exclusionary Act. And that kept happening in every generation, you know, whether it was during the Japanese internment camps. The school sent people out into, faculty out to the camp, because 6 of our students who were Japanese students were taken into the camp. So the faculty, this is before Zoom, actually had to go into the camp to teach them so they could finish their programs. And when one of them completed, George Aki brought 500 people from congregations all over the region to his ordination at Tamarack Racetrack, where the camp was, where they were being held, as a witness to say this is wrong. So in every generation, there's been something else to be afraid of, right? That could prevent us from acting, from taking a stand. And in every generation, the school has sought to figure out ways of what is it that we stand. And we draw on the gospel. Any encounter between humans and the divine in the scriptures always begins with the same phrase: do not be afraid, right? Whether it's, you know, angels praising and announcing the birth of Jesus, or Moses getting called by God by a burning bush, the phrase, it always starts the same way. So at the core of our ministry or of our mission is the resistance of fear. And I think that powers that repress and exclude, their tool is fear. Think about the current use of ICE as its weapon of fear. Trump has actually deported fewer people than even Biden was deporting, right? He's very inefficient about it. And his goal is not to deport people. He'll say that till he's blue in the face. But the reality is that his goal is to create fear. You cannot physically deport 11 million people out of this country. You just cannot do it. It is simply not doable. It took Germany a completely concerted effort to round out 6 million Jews for 4 years. That's not going to happen here. The goal is to create fear, so that the people who are, you know, standing out around Home Depot will do it for less. So that the people that are cleaning up Trump Tower won't complain the next time that they're sexually harassed, right? That's the goal. It's fear. And to scare people into agreeing not to speak out, not to challenge the political reality, whichever one it is. So I do think that as Christians, as religious communities, certainly for us as a seminary, the goal is to be unafraid. Because the question should be, who's trying to make me afraid and why? So, yeah. Completely. Trying to scare everybody into submission. Yeah. But, you know, we just had a great sermon a couple of weeks ago about, you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, who were required to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue and decided not to do it. So lots of witness in the Bible to stand up. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Please visit us both online. It's just psr.edu to see what's going on campus. You can see some of our programs. There are projects and programs there that are available to you all as you try to do your ministry and work. You can also find ways to support PSR. If you're interested in finding out more about that, please do. Let's talk. And also come to campus. Visit us in person. Chapel is every Tuesday at 11:10. You can join in person or online, but come to campus. It's a beautiful space, and you'll get a chance to kind of see the space that shaped both Lauren and Todd as well. So thank you.
And if any of you heard that congregational renewal, do we have a project in this church? I wonder if we could form a if you're interested in that, I am interested in that. And if that piqued your interest, let's have a conversation. Thank you, David.